493 in your songbook, 493. Thanks for being in Sunday school this morning. We'll sing Every Day with Jesus. Remain seated. 493. We'll sing it 2 times through. Guys will come for our offering, our Man of God offering here at the end of the song. 493. Thanks for being here this morning as we sing 493. Sing it. We'll sing it 2 times through. Ready? Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and he's the one I'm waiting for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day. Sing it one more time, the ushers will come. Ready? Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. Jesus saves and keeps me, and he's the one I'm waiting for. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Amen. Great job singing. And please, if you haven't already, take advantage of the daily Bible reading plan chart we have for 2024. You're ahead of the game. It starts tomorrow. Amen. And so you can grab that. There's enough for everybody. We got 100 of them. And then if you haven't gotten a prayer card yet to turn in a prayer request, you can do so. And then you can just put it on the pulpit between services. And thank you for giving to the man of God. And here's our offering for that. And guys, we're going to go ahead and have that plates come along your way. And Brother Hastrick's going to come up. And hope you got your sheet. If not, we'll get one to you. And thank you for being in Sunday school this morning, Brother Hastrick. Appreciate it.
Good morning. All right. Gonna make you think this morning. Sorry, but you have to do it once in a while just to keep it moving there. And we're gonna mix it up a little bit. Turn to the page 3 of your handout sheet. Down to the section right at the bottom where it tells us what Daniel 9 teaches us. We're going to do that first, then we're going to go back to the beginning. Your last page at the bottom, we're going to fill that in first. That's the way I used to do my tests in school. I'd start at the back and work my way forward. All right, Daniel 9:24 through 27, where we're talking about the 70 weeks or the 77 groups of years. Messiah would be present 483 years after the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. 483 years. Daniel also told us that Messiah would be legally executed. Messiah's death would result in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. The destruction. And Messiah's birth and death must happen before AD 70. I think we've heard that once or twice before. All right, so then back to page 1. We're going to start off in Luke chapter 2 today. And it wasn't planned, but everything just seemed to fall into place as far as the season. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into Daniel and some of the other prophets. After the birth of Jesus in the animal shelter, we're not told exactly what happened with Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. Certainly, Joseph would have been busy trying to find a better place for Mary and the baby to stay as they both gained strength after his birth. And Joseph would also be seeing to the matter of the tax registration that had been ordered by Caesar Augustus. Now we read in Luke chapter 2 and verse 21. And when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcising of the child, his name was called Jesus, which was so named of the angel before he was conceived in the womb. So it was on the 8th day, as the law instructed in Leviticus 12:3, that Jesus was circumcised. Now this rite of circumcision was performed either by a priest or by the father. Either way was all right, just so long as it was done. It's very probable Joseph did the circumcising, considering the vast crowds that would have been in Bethlehem. It would probably have been difficult to get that to be arranged to have been done in a synagogue. Now Joseph would have looked after the careful recording of this rite of circumcision and the naming of the child, so that the genealogies kept in the temple were accurate in every detail. And he probably had that recorded at the temple when they went to perform the rites that were needed to be done later. But once that was done, that would make it easy for Luke or Matthew to read the genealogy of Jesus all the way back to Adam, either through Mary's line or Joseph's. Now in verses 22 through 24, and when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. There's several points here that need to be cleared up to help us understand what's going on. First, it was a requirement of the Mosaic law found in Leviticus 12:2 through 8, that 40 days of purification, 40 days were required for a male child. If it was a female child, it would have been 80 days. Then, to complete the rite of purification, 2 offerings were to be brought to the priest at the temple door. For a poor family, that would be either 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for the burnt offering, the other for the sin offering. So, now the required 40 days have passed. Mary and Joseph will begin their trek back to Nazareth. On the route home, they first visit the temple in Jerusalem to fulfill the requirements of the law concerning both Mary and the newborn Jesus. Jesus is brought into the temple where, as the firstborn male child, he is to be presented unto the Lord. He's to be presented, as the law states in Numbers 8:17. Then in verse 25, behold, there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and the same man was just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Ghost was upon him. They're met in the temple by Simeon, the man of God, who is waiting for the consolation of Israel. That term, consolation of Israel, is another title for the Messiah of Israel. It's another title for the Messiah. So Simeon is waiting for the promised Messiah. Also, they are met by the prophetess Anna, who at that time would have been at least 106 years old. Verse 38. And she, coming in that instant, gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spake of him to all them that looked for redemption in Israel. She also had great praise to the Lord for the privilege of seeing the Messiah, and she spoke of Jesus to all those who came to the temple, whom she knew to be looking for the coming of the Messiah. The redemption in Jerusalem is another messianic title. It's a messianic title. So this gives us some information that there were numerous devout Jews who, like Simeon, knew that the 483 years from the rebuilding of the temple were about to be fulfilled, and thus they looked expectantly for their Messiah. And if you read back in history, it will mention that there were numerous claims of men to be the Messiah. Many of them ended tragically. Others just kind of fizzled and faded away. But of course, none of them were the actual Messiah until the birth of Jesus. Now we come to one verse in this account that many commentators overlook in developing the account surrounding the birth of Jesus the Messiah. Verse 39. And when they, referring to Joseph and Mary, had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. So finally, after all this commotion with Simeon and Anna and the people all around, they're finally able to get to the presentation of the child to the priest and the offering of the prescribed sacrifices for Mary's purification. And after that, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. They returned to Nazareth. They only spent about a month and a half in Bethlehem, only about 40, give or take, days in Bethlehem. Well, how did the wise men know about this birth of the Messiah? Well, now we go back to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, we'll start in verse 1. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Now, the term "now when Jesus was born" actually refers to not the specific day of his birth, but in the time period surrounding the birth of Jesus. Matthew 2 contains the account of the wise men of the East visit to the young child, Jesus, and they were led to the child by a star. Now at Christmas time, almost every manger scene has Mary, Joseph, and Jesus with the shepherds on one side and 3 wise men with crowns on the other side. It's traditional, but it's not realistic. There is a 2-year gap. A 2-year gap between the shepherds seeing Jesus and the arrival of the wise men. They only saw the star when Jesus was born, and it took them some long time to arrive. Matthew tells us that Jesus was about 2 years old when visited by the wise men. Secondly, when the wise men found Jesus, he was in a home, not a stable. He was in a home. The number of wise men is unknown. It was at least 2 because of the plural word men, but it could have been many more. It's assumed there were 3 because 3 gifts were given: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But these could have been given by any amount of wise men. They are commonly referred to as kings, and we probably get that from the song "We Three Kings of Orient Are." However, it's definitely known they were not kings, so don't get your doctrinal theology out of hymns. There's a thing called poetic license that oftentimes enters into those things. The Greek word translated magoi or magi, meaning wise men, or more literally, astrologers. They look to the stars to find signs of such things as the coming of kings. So what do we know from Matthew is that 2 or more astrologers arrived in Jerusalem from the east, and biblically east refers to Mesopotamia or Babylonia, depending on which kingdom was in the ascendancy at the time. East refers to Mesopotamia or Babylonia. They asked the question, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" And this raises a number of questions. Did they gain the knowledge of a Jewish king through astrology? A Jewish king? How did these Babylonians know anything about the birth of a Jewish king? How did they know? Why would Babylonian astrologers want to worship a Jewish king? Why would they worship a Jewish king? They didn't worship other Jewish kings, so why this one? And what about this star they followed? What about the star? Now, before we begin to interpret what this star is, let's remember the basic rule of Bible study stated by Dr. David L. Cooper. He's the one who wrote that short little pamphlet of about 640 pages I told you about last week. But he says, when the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. Don't look like so many have done in the past of trying to allegorize it or symbolize it. If it makes sense the way it is, accept it as that. If it's symbolical, the Bible will pretty much make that very clear. Like when Jesus said, "I am the door." We know Jesus wasn't a door. He's being symbolical. Okay, so seek no other sense. Therefore, take every word at its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning, unless the facts of the immediate context studied in the light of related passages and axiomatic fundamental truths indicate clearly otherwise. So there's 5 things that indicate this star was not a literal physical star. Number 1, it is referred to as his star. It is the personal star of the King of the Jews. It's the personal star. The star appears and disappears. When they got to Jerusalem, the star wasn't around anymore. That's why they had to ask, "Where is he?" They couldn't follow the star. Okay. It moves east to west. You know, it's not part of the same constellation every night. You look up there and move somewhere. It also moves south to north. And it literally hovers over one single house. It hovers over one single house. A natural star, close enough to distinguish one particular house, would burn up the entire planet. Now, the root meaning of the Greek word for star simply means radiance or brilliance. Brilliance. They saw a brilliance in the sky. What's actually pictured here is called the Shekinah glory. Shekinah glory. It's the visible manifestation of God. In most cases in the Old Testament, it came in the form of light, fire, a cloud, or a combination of these. Keeping in mind that in olden times, astrology and astronomy were combined, these astrologers, when they saw this great radiance, deduced that it was a sign that the Messiah had finally been born. But how did they know about a messianic king? How did they know? And why would they care? Hold your place in Matthew, because we'll be back here eventually, and go to Daniel chapter 2. We're in a chapter 2 rut here this morning, aren't we? Daniel chapter 2. Remember that the book of Daniel was not written in Israel. It was written in Babylon. Daniel was written in Babylon. Now in Daniel chapter 2, we have an interesting account. And I'm going to hit 4 verses that just kind of summarize the entire chapter. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 2. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. Then down in verse 10, the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asked such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. Nebuchadnezzar had had a dream. He couldn't remember the dream, and he wanted the astrologers to tell him what the dream was and what it meant. And they said, well, you tell us the dream, we'll tell you what it meant. And he said, no, you tell me the dream and what it meant. Okay, then verse 28. So none of these astrologers could help the king here. And in verse 28, Daniel is speaking after he gets called in. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. And Daniel tells him what he dreamt and what it meant. And then verse 48. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. When the Babylon astrologers failed to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel did, and he was made head of all the astrologers. He was made the head of all the astrologers of Babylon, and they had there what we would call a school of astrologers there. It would be a gathering of astrologers to discuss things and to teach others. As a result, it's likely that many of the astrologers at least heard about the expected Messiah, and some may even converted to Judaism. They also would have read Daniel's prophetic writings. So they would have known about when the birth of Messiah was to be. They would know when, because Daniel had put that down in writing in what we know is chapter 9. But Daniel says nothing about a star. To get to the star, we need to go all the way back to Numbers chapter 24. Numbers 24 and verse 17. Balaam is given a prophecy here. He says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Sheth. For the star, we need to come here to Numbers and the prophecies of Balaam. Now up in verse 17, Balaam, the Mesopotamian or Babylonian astrologer, tried to curse Israel. He tried to curse Israel, but God made him bless them instead. Before leaving Balak, he prophesied about the coming star. There shall come a star out of Judah. This prophecy is actually about the coming Messiah, not a literal star. Because after referring to a star out of Jacob, he then says, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. The star and the scepter are referring to the same person. And we had talked about this months ago when we first got into this study. A scepter is a kingly symbol, and this star that would rise out of Jacob is to be a king. Remember that Balaam was an astrologer. And he was from a city on the banks of the Euphrates River in Babylonia or Mesopotamia, depending on who's in charge. So this gives us a double connection. Daniel is telling us when to expect the coming Messiah. When to expect him. 483 years from Cyrus's decree. The prophecy of Balaam concerns the sign of the star. So after 483 years, look for the sign of a star. And no doubt, as one of the Babylonian astrologers, Balaam's prophecy was passed on to other astrologers. Hundreds of years afterwards, Daniel was able to add to this prophecy by giving the Babylonian astrologers a time frame to be looking for the star of Jacob. So how did the wise men know? It was not by the false science of astrology, but through God's revelations in scriptures, through the prophecies of Balaam and Daniel, through the prophecies. So where did the star take these magi to? Well, the last thing that Herod wanted was for the Israelites to find their Messiah. They were hard enough to control as they were, and this birth might represent a rallying point for them. And Herod surely didn't need that on top of all his other problems. It would be easier just to find out where the child was, have him killed, and most of Palestine would be none the wiser. So he would use these wise men to unknowingly help him with his dirty work. And thus he sent them on their way. As they left Herod's palace, presumably headed 6 miles down the road to Bethlehem, we are told with some exclamation, now back to Matthew 2. Matthew chapter 2. And the second half of verse 9. It says, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. This very same star, the one that they had seen back in their own country, which had apparently not been visible for some time, now reappeared right at the moment of their departure from Herod's palace. The moment of their departure. And it was to guide them in this final stage of their journey right to where the young child was. Remember that in Luke 2:39, that after Jesus' parents had performed everything in the temple in the way of sacrifices that were required for Mary and the baby, they returned into Galilee. They returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. And we know that this would have happened about the 40th day after Jesus was born, according to Luke 2:22 and Leviticus 12:2 through 4. So now to get the events of this story straight, we have to get the timing straight. When this is accomplished, everything falls neatly into place. First of all, the star these astrologers saw in their home country was not a natural phenomenon. It was not a natural phenomenon any more than the pillar of fire by night or the cloud by day that led the Israelite children through the wilderness was a natural phenomenon. Matthew 2:9 tells us that the very same star that these men had seen in the east now reappeared. It reappeared and went before them. Just like the pillar of fire guided the Israelites. It went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. According to Matthew 2:11, the young child was in a house, not a stable. He was in a house. According to Luke 2:39, this house was in Nazareth. Nazareth of Galilee, 65 miles to the north, not in Bethlehem. So the star led them step by step to where the young child was. Now, natural stars do not go before to lead men down the road. Now, they're up there and you can use them to figure your direction, but they don't lead you from spot to spot. There was something supernatural about this star. Just as there was something supernatural about every other aspect of this virgin birth. God didn't tell the wise men at the time they first saw the star in the east that Jesus was born in the city of David. Daniel's prophecy didn't mention it. Nothing indicated that. There was nothing to indicate he was born in the city of David. Because God knew that by the time they arrived there, Jesus would be living in Nazareth of Galilee. So instead, God provided a miraculous second appearance of their special star. Now, going back to the timing factor, these wise men were from what had been the Babylonian Empire. The old Babylonian Empire, but at this time it was under Roman rule. Therefore, it would have taken about 4 months to travel from Babylon to Jerusalem once they got underway. And this is based on the time it took Ezra to make the same journey as shown in Ezra 7:9. Plus, they would have had to prepare for quite a long trip, so additional time would be required for this preparation. Well, whoever was going, they had to get all these people together, they had to get the camels, they had to get all of the supplies that it was going to take, the money, the gifts, everything had to be arranged. So to narrow down this timing element, we go back to Herod and Matthew 2, verse 7. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, privately, inquiring of them diligently what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. So in this text, we see that 6 times in these verses, Jesus is referred to as a young child, not an infant. He's a young child. In verse 16, then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof. So we now read that this madman Herod slew all the young children from 2 years old and under. Why 2 years? This was based on what Herod had learned when he so diligently inquired of these wise men as to when they had seen the Lord's star in the east. So probably no long period of time elapsed between the time the wise men left Herod's palace until he began to suspect that he had been fooled. Bethlehem was just a few miles away. Herod had a huge secret service that kept track of everything going on around Jerusalem. So it would have been very soon that he expected them back. And he would have been notified that they didn't head off towards Bethlehem, they headed off in another direction. So shortly after these magi left Herod's court, he began his brutal and heartless massacre of the male 2-year-olds in and around Bethlehem. From this, we can reasonably assume that Jesus was approximately 2 years old when the Magi found him, and that this was the amount of time it took them to prepare for and to make their journey. They found him in a house in Nazareth of Galilee because this is where the miraculous star led them. The star, which not only started them on this journey, also guided them step by step the final miles of their way. Matthew 2:10 tells us that when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And they knew the purpose of their journey was about to be realized. When the star stopped, it stopped right over the house where Jesus was. And then we're told in Matthew 2:11 that when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother and fell down and worshiped him. Not his mother, not him and his mother, they worshiped him. Now we will finish up next week on the gifts and the final scene of this episode. So do we have any questions at this time? So hang on to your sheets for next week. Anyone have any questions? It makes you do that.